All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, for those who are watching this live, thank you very much. And for those of you who are watching this recorded, thank you very much as well. If you're wondering what hangout you're at, you are on the Beyond Tiles talk, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Some of you may be coming from developer movement. And so hello to you all as well. And then if you've just been hanging on Google Plus and you found this, then that's awesome as well. So we're glad that you're here. So if you're wondering what we're here for, we're actually a part. This is a part of a set of things that we've been doing in Canada, actually, called Beyond Tiles. And Beyond Tiles is really conceptually getting people to think about modern design for apps. So a lot of times what has happened is, especially in the Windows space, a lot of people kind of when they think of, oh, building a modern app, they think of, tiles and Sago, and they pretty much leave it at that. And they feel like there's kind of this need for very kind of edict or dictatorial guidance. And what we wanted to do with this talk and with all the talks we've been doing with Beyond Tiles is really sort of get people thinking beyond that. Not only by kind of looking at how to build apps today, but then also too looking at sort of the masters of the past and looking at those design folks and saying, hey, what do they bring to the table? Where do they come from? And get some really good introspection of what it is that is to be modern. So who we have here today with us to talk about it is Arturo Toledo, who is the chief architect at Toledo Design. We also have Sean Walcott, the senior designer from Xbox Studio. We also have Alejandro Toledo from Toledo Design, and he is an interaction designer. And I'm Tommy Lewis. I'm a technical evangelist here at Microsoft Canada, and I'm here just to sort of kick things off and then also help answer any questions that come through the chat. And of course, at the end, we can take some questions there as well. And just one more thing before I flip it to Arturo, I wanted to let everyone know who's watching us live. You are going to be well rewarded for your endeavor. So what we're doing is we're actually giving free tokens to the Windows Phone Store, which is a $20 value. So those of you who are watching live, we're going to send you a thank you email. And in that email, you'll just respond to us that you want that free token. And we'll send it out to you. So kind of a nice little benefit of watching this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of be quiet, and I'm going to kick it over to Arturo and gang to talk about modern design. Take it away, Arturo.
Awesome. So how are you guys? Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us, especially those of you who just joined in short notice. And thank you to Nokia, the Nokia Develop team, for helping us retweet that initial invitation for all of you. We're very excited to have some special guests here with us. Just like Tommy mentioned, we have the pleasure of having Sean Wilcott with us. He's a design lead in the Xbox Design Studio. I met Sean a couple years ago already, along with August de los Reyes, another lead in the Xbox Design team, in a workshop with Massimo Vignelli in New York. And just like, both of they told me at the beginning, a week with Massimo will change your life as a designer. And I think it has definitely opened my eyes to a lot of different ways of understanding design. And so I thought it would be really valuable to have Sean in the call. He's, how there are, engineers or space scientists who love to really get into, their thing and really study the stars and the cosmos and everything else. I see Sean a little bit like that. Like he knows every single designer and all the work that they've done. He knows a lot of the history of design. And I think that's one of the things that I've gotten a lot from him in the last couple of years. So we're gonna get some really good stories from him and information. We also have my brother Alejandro, who's currently in Mexico. He's right now in the process of moving. There he is. I don't. Oh, actually, yeah, because you can't see it, you can see me only. But yeah, so we're gonna have fun these 1 hour, and the goal for this hour is to basically have a design conversation. But along with having this design conversation, we also want to give you a demo of how we can design, in this particular case, a Windows Phone user interface. I'm not gonna even call it an application, because honestly, in the 50 minutes that we have left, we cannot fully design an entire application. But we're certainly going to try to connect the dots between the teachings of the masters of modern design of the 20th century and the work that you guys as interaction developers and designers are doing these days. So we're going to design a quick Windows Phone application, and we're going to be very careful to highlight the fact that a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, if not everything, not only applies to Windows Phone, but also to Windows and to any other thing that you might want to design from an interaction point of view. So let me jump into my slides over here, and hopefully you guys can see my slides now. That should be the case.
Yeah, they are there.
Perfect. So yeah, we'll skip through some of this. Thank you, Tommy, obviously, Carrie, also from Microsoft Canada, for sponsoring this event and from kind of leading this conversation around Beyond Tiles. We already talked about Sean, and this is the hashtag in case you guys want to tweet and send us some ideas or feedback for the next upcoming session. We would love to hear from you. So let's talk about the masters, and the first master that we want to talk about is Dieter Rams, super influential, if not the most influential designer of the 20th century. He was an industrial designer, and Massimo Vignelli has referred to him as the best designer that has ever lived. So, Sean, what do you think about Dieter Rams? What do you think he taught us, and what he contributed to the design world?
Well, I think with Dieter Rams, he was responsible for design at Braun in the 60s to the 80s, and was obviously very influential, and kind of his main ethos was this notion of less but better, and I think there's a lot to learn there for application design in particular, where as we think about kind of the user's needs and designing a great experience that's both aesthetically pleasing and functionally pleasing and simplified, is that notion of less but better. And he was not about the bloat of features, but really to focus on the essence and to search for that essence. He has 10 principles of good design that I encourage everyone to look up online, that I think are really a great map for any of us as application designers or developers as well.
Perfect. And this element that we have here on the screen is, of course, not designed by Dieter Rams. Some people actually get to think that's the case. But one of the things that Sean and I were discussing, and that I discussed with Alejandro in some of our events this year, is that what used to happen before Dieter Rams got to the scene is that a lot of industrial designers were starting to package technology or new technology inside of these kind of elements that would resemble furniture or something that people were used to or feel comfortable with. All these textures and ornaments and things like that. And what Dieter Rams said with all of his work, and in particular with this particular example, which is nicknamed the Snow White Coffin, is that functionality, we should not be afraid or embarrassed of showing the functionality of the object. The functionality of the object should be the user interface and should become the aesthetics of the object. And I think, just like Sean mentioned, this applies 100% to user interface design, right? We don't do things just because we want to be cool or want them to look beautiful per se. We want to showcase the functionality and enable people to achieve different things. So here are a couple other images. And again, there's a lot of information about Dieter Rams out there. But now I'm going to jump into the tool. So this is Expression Design, and Expression Design is a tool that I personally use. I've been using it for a few years now. It's a free tool from Microsoft, and it's a tool that you can actually get at the following URL. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this URL. You can get this tool for free. Now, of course, if you're a designer or a developer who has Creative Suite and you use Adobe Illustrator or Adobe Photoshop, needless to say, those two tools are really the way to go. In fact, one of the things that I learned from Sean in the last couple of years is that he actually uses Adobe InDesign to do most of his work. And once he showed me a couple of the things that he's done, it clearly made sense to me why. InDesign has a lot of amazing features in terms of text reflow, grids, and it's just kind of a better layout tool, obviously, than Illustrator and Photoshop. And in the couple recent versions, InDesign included the ability to create digital documents as well, measured in pixels. So that helps. That helps also. But if you don't have Creative Suite, you're a developer and you don't want to, invest those $49 a month in Creative Suite, this is a very useful tool called Expression Design, which is not going to be supported by Microsoft in the future, but it's made available for free. So now that we're here in Expression Design, we have a number of things. We're going to make sure that everyone gets access to these files. And I'm going to create a new document. I'm going to make it really tiny. So, and this is not really a expression design tutorial, so please forgive me if I go a little bit too fast on using some of the features. This is more about the design of the UI. So one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into my templates file over here, and I am going to copy both the Windows Phone screen template, which is currently the large screen 1280 by 768 pixels, and the corresponding Windows Phone design grid. It turns out the Windows Phone Design Studio actually came up with a modular grid, which we have on the screen right now. And this modular grid helps you design. It's a very good starting point to design a Windows Phone application. So I'm going to paste those couple things on this new document. And this is where we can start basically defining a lot of our content here and our information. Now, just like Dieter Ram said, the first thing we have to understand about a user interface is understand the type of content we want to put inside of it. So before even jumping to making it totally beautiful or even going into Visual Studio and coding the user interface out in SAML and C#, we first have to understand what type of information we're dealing with. So let's put some very raw information of what we will need here. So what we're going to do is we're going to design an application called Petit Déjeuner, which is basically a small little application that will help us find a good place, a recommended place for us to go have breakfast. So we're going to have some text over here. Usually, when I sketch things out in Expression Design, I usually like to go for kind of a neutral font like Arial. It's just very neutral in terms of it doesn't commit me to anything in the future. It's not nice. It's ugly enough that I know I can change it in the future. The other thing that I will do here is, we're going to have a search page because we want to search for some of our restaurants. We're going to have location. So the location will allow us to type in maybe a zip code or a postal code or an address, and then perhaps we will have the ability to search by my location. So I'm just typing in the basic information I will need in a very simple way, no formatting or anything. This is what usually would be done by an information architect, someone who would actually spend time with the client, abstracting all the information that we feel we need for the project. And information architects would do endless number of Excel spreadsheets, Word files, collect PDFs of all sorts, basically come up to the basic set of information that you might need. The other thing that I like to do when I'm sketching Expression Design at this point, and again following a little bit of Dieter Ram's teachings in terms of exposing the functionality, I don't want to hide it. I want to be very out there with the functionalities. Certainly for location, we're probably going to eventually be needing some sort of search bar. And I don't know what color it will be. I just know there will be a search bar here with some sort of go button. Again, I don't know the size, and I don't care about it right now. I'm just laying it out real quick. And the me location, which will eventually have an icon perhaps somewhere around here. So if I make a copy of this, let me move my grid up here. We'll talk about the grid in a moment. I can start doing the second round of formatting content. So the second thing that I learned in the Windows Phone Design Studio, and a lot of people, every design team in Microsoft does it these days, is they ask themselves, what is the most important thing in this user interface that I want to highlight. And based on that, they really push that forward, and they make that really stand out a lot more. So I'm going to give it a first pass of this UI, a first pass of formatting, especially on text. And let me start by applying some actual font, some actually typefaces that I like. So again, another thing that I learned from this one came from August, who convinced me a couple years ago, August de los Reyes, from the Xbox team as well, to make the investment to buy New Has Grotesque. New Has Grotesque might sound like a weird name to most of you. It's actually Helvetica. It's what I would see as the most faithful representation of the original Helvetica, even though there are other Helvetica fonts out there. But this was kind of the original name. And Sean, maybe you have some background history about that as well, in terms of how those names came about. There's like New Helvetica, etc.
Yeah, well, New Haus Grotesque is that's the original Swiss name of Helvetica, and the Latin name for Switzerland is Helvetia. So when it got released in America, the name was changed from New Haus Grotesque to Helvetica to Americanize it. So that's a little bit of history. And Arial obviously is Microsoft's copy of Helvetica.
Yes, and definitely one of the things that we found out, Alejandro and I mean, Alejandro has a developer background, but one of the things I think he's seen this year is, the value of really investing into good typography. It immediately translates into design that looks much more solid and much more credible. So one thing that you guys might have noticed here is that I started doing some size changes over here. So Petit Déjeuner is the title for the application. We should usually try to avoid random sizes or dimensions for fonts like 45.121, as I have there. Obviously, it's always better to go to whole numbers. And this is one of those areas where Illustrator and Photoshop obviously do a better job than Expression Design. But for sketching purposes, it's more than enough for now. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. One thing to consider is that at this size, 1280 by 768, the minimum recommended point size for typing Windows Phone is around 15 to 16 points. That's the smallest size we should go for. So if I go for something like 16 points for location, that's the smallest thing I can go for. I'll probably go for something like 18 for this location box area over here. Now, arguably, we could convert this location text or label into an icon that resembles location. That's also a possibility. I'm going to leave it like that for now. The other thing that I will eventually have is a logo up here, which we can create by tracing an element, as we will see in a moment. The other thing I want to start getting into right now and doing some formatting is some of the elements that we're going to have in our list results. So once we search for a restaurant, what types of things are we going to get? We're going to get, this is more information architecture. We're going to get an image. We're going to get the name of the restaurant. We're going to get, say, the distance to that restaurant. So distance. I'm literally typing what developers would know as a field or a data field name, the type of food, and finally the number of likes, or how many people have kind of approved this place. Now, of course, in a second stage of information architecture, one of the things we want to do is we want to replace these field names, which don't really represent the information we want to do, with some actual information. The first layer of fidelity on that regard is using lorem ipsum. So there's tons of sites out there. If you just look for lorem ipsum, you can generate lorem ipsum. But probably a second layer of fidelity is to actually type in some Mama Rosas, let's call this, some actual names for restaurants. Maybe the distance is going to be 0.5, because once you start doing that, you start really to feel and deal with the real problem, which is how do you accommodate all this information here. So likes, it's more like, we're going to have 345 likes. And the image, let's take a look at the image. A typical question that we also get all the time is, what kind of image should I use, right? And I would say that for this case, we have to be rational, just like Dieter Rams was telling us. Let's analyze the functionality of that image. It's not just about coming up with a square because it looks cool, or a random kind of a little bit of a shy rectangle like that, right? It's more like, let's take a look at what's the type of content we deal with. We could be using a square. A lot of photographs are taken at a 4:3 proportion. So if we go to and make this element 4:3 in proportion, it would look a little bit something like that. And in some other cases, some photos, or when you get some things from videos, you get even some 16:9 proportions. So if you go take a look down there in my screen, I'm making this 16:9. So I would dare to say that these are kind of our three key options for our photographs here. Now, if your database is sending you all 4:3 images, then obviously probably the best option is to show 4:3 images, right? 16:9 looks kind of cooler, but if all your images are 4:3, that means you're going to have to crop some of them. So you have to take a rational decision around this. For now, we'll probably go for the 4:3, which is usually not my favorite size or length or proportion, but it's the one that probably makes more sense here. So you will see how I start having my different list items here. And I'm just going to copy them. Again, this is just a sketch. Of course, we could be sketching on paper, but in this case, Expression Design is cool enough that it allows you to sketch just live without focusing a lot on the details. So those are the basic elements we're going to need. Now, how do we start actually making some good layout and design here? Well, we're going to do that by using the grid. Okay, so let's jump to our next master over here, Massimo Vignelli, and I'm sure that Sean will have a lot to say about Massimo. So Sean, what would you say would be kind of some of the big teachings from Massimo? Of course, he has done a lot for the design community. So what do you think?
Well, I think with Massimo, he's just all-consuming and passionate about design, and that's just been, a fantastic thing where he is truly one of the heroes of design out there. But he really gives his time to, to teach upcoming designers and show them, better and more efficient ways of doing things. But one of the biggest things that had an impact on me was that with him, with design, it's not a style, it's a language, that he approaches design as a visual language. So that's something where, especially as we're making user interfaces and things that really become system design in a sense that, Dieter Rams approached as well, is when you're creating an app or you're creating a web experience or whatever it is to think of design as a language. And within that language, you'll have certain ways that things are positioned on a page and the way things, have a certain amount of tension. So that's kind of a key takeaway. And as well with Massimo, is really kind of this emphasis on a few typefaces, a few sizes, that really everything is very focused within the grid, a simple grid that's, has a clear structure. And then within that, it becomes our challenge as a designer to use a couple key elements, 2 or 3 type sizes, and to kind of push those to their maximum. And I find personally as a designer, by restricting myself in that sense of only using 2 to 3 type sizes and having a basic grid, is that it really helps us to become stronger designers with the fundamentals. And to get better at layout and pacing and all these key things that make for a better application.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean I think we're all still lucky that Massimo is around with us, and actually there is a new documentary / movie called Design is One with Massimo and Lila, his wife, and it's just starting to hit the road as of these last few weeks, right, Sean? I believe.
Yeah, it's definitely it's out there on the festival circuit, and it's cool to see that happening. He'll be turning 84 next month, so he's incredibly sharp. He's sharper than most 20-year-olds, and he's in his 80s.
Yeah, the thing that impresses me about him is that in the camps that we've had the opportunity to be with him is he goes all the way from Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. reviewing 15 designers' projects every single minute of every single day, all those hours, and it's just incredible, like the amount of energy and passion that he has for design. There's a very cool book and link that I want to share with you guys. This is the Canon. So Massimo was kind enough to write and produce a Canon, the Vignelli Canon. It's a little book, free, available right there. It's a short read, very valuable. It talks about all the work that he's done and a lot of the language, the Vignelli language, but it's definitely applicable to all the things that we do as user interaction designers. This is another interesting link for you guys at mohawkconnects.com/Massimo. You will see a video from Massimo on his process of designing a book, how he designs and sketches books. Really useful links right there for you guys. So coming back here to expression design, let's try to apply a little bit of that teaching by using a grid. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this just so that we can see when I sketch in expression design, I usually like to make all these different copies so that I can see my design evolve, and then I have some sort of primitive versioning control of my process, and I can also learn from my own decisions throughout the process, and that becomes really useful. So as soon as I overlay my Windows Phone Design grid that the Windows Phone Design Studio created, I immediately start noticing that some things are obviously off, right? For example, my title is not perfectly aligned to this area over here. One thing to keep in mind is that this top area up here, I'm going to mark this in green color. This is usually reserved or at least protected for the status bar that comes down from the phone. So theory says that if the status bar comes down, this title will be completely next to the status bar. So that's probably not the best idea. Maybe we want to push this a little bit lower so there's some buffer space in between those two, but still aiming for this connection or interconnection between grid lines. One of the other questions, and maybe Sean, you have some insight there, that I always had before going to Massimo's camp is, should we necessarily make the font match the height of it or to fit within particular grid lines, or can it be a little bit independent? So for example, if I had 54 points here, some people would say, well, this is not matching the grid line, but we are certainly obeying this baseline over here. So what do you think about those type of things?
I mean, from my perspective with those type of things, I think it helps you to be efficient in the long run if things do match the grid.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, ideally, if you're not matching the grid line, what I do is I use kind of the grid to hang elements, and things will be fluid within that space, and then I'll kind of have another point where a type will hang from it again. How I have a very simple Excel that lets you automatically calculate your type spec for a grid, and I'll send that to Arturo so he can give that out to everybody after the fact. But it's a very simple thing where you can actually say how many pixels high is your space that you're designing in, and then you tell how many modules you have, and it will tell you how you need to adjust your pixel canvas to have a perfectly synchronized grid and typography. So, and based on Joseph Mueller-Brockman, who we'll touch on a little bit later, kind of, his approach is that, the type and the grid are constantly in harmony. That way, when you have a break in the grid, things, match up, and the top of images match up with the top of type, and everything's very harmonious in that sense.
Exactly, and that's kind of one of the biggest things that I think Massimo has contributed to us as a mentor, is the fact that he has, always, well, not only him, but also his faculty, right? We must mention Roger, Remington, and Bruce, who are part of their team in the Massimo Vignelli Design Study Center, and they're, of course, people who are always advocating for following some of this structured approach to design versus the random. So instead of just having random position, what the grid gives you, Alejandro as a developer with a developer background, the way he describes grids, which I think is very interesting, is that it's nothing more than an information system, which is something that, by the way, developers are super used to, and designers we just do it in a different way. We do it with a grid, but it's just an information system at the end.
Yeah, and you know what? Something that I love as a developer, or from a background as a developer, discovering the grid and the structure, is that it gives me this feeling of I am in control of this language. I can code with this language. So it's very interesting to see how can we, you know, code with a visual language with this structure that is the grid. And yeah, that's something that I love.
Perfect. So we're laying out some other elements here. You guys are seeing me make some progress, and arguably maybe some of these elements could be a little bit bigger, but I just want to keep on flowing. Not every time that we do design live, I tend to get really picky. So, but kind of the next thing that we have here, you can see how we're fitting elements to the grid. Now, here's another question. Based on this conversation about the grid, where should we place these couple elements? Should we place them here, 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 right? So we're aligning things to this edge of the grid. And I think in this case, we have a lot of flexibility to do something like that. The only thing we want to try to avoid is to try to put things so close to each other that people think they are the same. So for example, here, this element and this element, I personally think are so close to each other that it's hard for me to tell that they are two different things, and they are two different things. So it's always good to give yourself, you do use the grid to give yourself more room to differentiate those elements. And one of the things we probably could add here is one of my icons here. We'll make sure that you guys again get access to these files. This, which is the official kind of arrow button that Windows Phone uses, and the other Microsoft platforms obviously as well. So I can apply that one here, position it nicely in there. Probably a little bit too big in my opinion, but it's okay, I'll leave it there for now. Let's make this, let's change this color as well. And the next thing I think I want to do, this is a little bit too light. See, again, I tend to get really picky when I do live design, but that's just the way it is. So let's do this much darker should go 51 for RGB. So yeah, moving forward. So we have the information for the restaurant, and one of the things that you guys will notice, let me hide the grid for a moment, move it over here. One of the things that you guys will notice, and we see this, one of the things that we've had an opportunity to do this year is we've been working with Nokia, in partnership with Nokia and the develop team, to do these things we call Nokia design consultations, which are basically 1-hour reviews of applications. And one of the very common things that we find in apps in the store is that you know, we tend to use text all in the same size and the same font, like this, right? So what the problem with something like this that we have on the screen right now is that every single piece of text has the same weight, has the same color, has the same size, and so they are all fighting for attention. They're all kind of raising their hands and saying, hey, pay attention to me first, and the other one is not like, no, pay attention to me first. So one of the things we do as designers, following, you know, good typography, you know, structure, is to first ask ourselves the same question that I mentioned earlier, that design teams in Microsoft ask themselves all the time. What is the most important thing out of these 4 pieces of content? And so arguably maybe one of the most interesting things here could be the title for the name of the restaurant. So we're going to make that bigger. Not just tiny bigger, that it's barely noticeable. We're going to be, like I like to say, dramatic about it. We want to make it much bigger. Of course, within the restrictions of the spacing that we have. Then what would you guys say is the next important thing? Perhaps the distance, right? Because a lot of times we will decide whether we go to a place or not based on the distance. So let's make Mama Rosa's, because it's bigger. I think it can hold a little bit of a thinner font, maybe something like a regular Helvetica there. And the type of food and the likes is probably less important. not as critical. So let's see how it looks with a thin. I'll probably even leave it just a pro so we can follow Sean's advice that Massimo has always provided in terms of using, as a limited set of different sizes and font types, because that keeps the design cleaner. The other thing I might want to do is I could potentially abstract the word likes for an icon. And this is where I would like to show you guys something that I use all the time from our, and if you're joining us from Twitter, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Austin Andrews. I want to highly regard him as a hero of the community, because he's done an amazing job of putting together this beautiful library of icons for free. He has now more than 1,000 icons, and this, to me, I know there are other libraries out there, but to me this is probably the best library that we can use as a starting point as designers and developers. It's called modernuiicons.com, and it has tons of really amazing icons that you can utilize for your applications. So, for example, here, if I search for the word thumb, you can see there's a bunch of really good icons here that I could use for a thumb that I could apply for a like icon here. So what I did previously, obviously, is I downloaded his library of icons, and I have them right here. So I'm just going to hit thumb and search for this, and here it is. So the one that I want is thumbs up. So what I usually just do is I go to my folder with my icons, and I'm going to search for thumb here. And what I'm basically looking for is my expression design thumb up icon file, which is this one. I'll double click it. That will open it in expression design, and here it is. As I always say, I wonder what this little thing is. It's always kind of curious, but once you zoom out, you can actually tell it's the nail of the finger. But the cool thing about this is you can always do some basic editing. So I can delete this vertex and just have my like icon there, which I can copy and paste over to my design over here. We'll have it something like this. So now this information is more clear. We're only playing with sizes and font weights. We're not doing anything else. So everything is black. We can probably play a little bit with that. Maybe this, the font, maybe this type of food and the likes, maybe this can be a little bit lighter. Let's say, let's go for the 555. That's a little bit low, but let's pretend this is a little bit lighter as well. So hopefully this is viewing and showing up nicely in your screen, guys. I hope so. The other thing that we can ask then ourselves is, okay, how do we define the separation between objects? Because that's the other typical thing. Sometimes we see apps that look like this, like everything's too close to each other, everything's centered. Some things are perhaps, like out of position. So how do we determine the layout of these different items? And our grid can definitely help us, but sometimes there's also like these numbers that are multipliers that we rely a lot on. And our grid can also give us a hint about that. So if you take a look at this grid, and you would take a look at these couple lines, this padding in between cells, we can see that this is 19 pixels. This has a 19 pixel size. So let me color that in green. We can make this 19 pixels exactly. So maybe 19 is kind of a magical good multiplier number that I can adopt here. So if that's the case, what I could do is I could go to Edit, Options, Units and Grids, and this is something that you can do just as well in Photoshop or Illustrator. I will set my notch increment to 19 pixels. And what I would do then is I would put these guys here together. And this is just one of the options that I have to lay out the text. There are other options. So I could hit the down arrow once and the down arrow again. So this is one option. Probably the text could be a little bit bigger. The other kind of interesting question here would be, where do we position the text against the image? So if we put the grid again up here, the image, first of all, has to go right and be nicely aligned to the grid. And if we take these three things over here, then, this is one option. We could have it there. We could have it here, probably hanging from the top. The other thing is that if we do want to respect our 19 pixels, then here it would say we could go to the edge of our image over here and hit the right arrow key, and that would be 19 pixels away, which is the same distance that we have here. Is now the same distance we have here. And those are just things, I guess, you can play with. What I'm trying to show more than accuracy right now, I guess because of the short time we have for the demo, is more how we are not taking random decisions on where to position things. We're trying to find ourselves reasons, structural reasons to position things in different places. And again, arguably the text here could probably be bigger because we definitely have the space to make it bigger. The other thing I will do now is I will group this thing and move it down here. Oops. Just make a few copies of this. And if you're a Visual Studio user, if you're a developer and you use Visual Studio all the time, I'm sure that this is one of those cool things where you can, of course, brag about the coolness of doing SAML, using SAML, because with SAML, of course, you can configure and customize your list boxes to look any way you want. So doing this thing that I'm doing as a designer would be relatively easy for a developer to then implement in Visual Studio, right? So some other restaurant, and it's always better to have like other different names. I was just gonna type Red Robin's, but I won't because that restaurant is evil. So I'm just gonna leave it like that for now. And let's take a look at the next master. So let me scroll down here. So Mies van der Rohe, he was an architect, and notice one of the things that I hope you guys are noticing one interesting trend here. We started talking about an industrial designer, Dieter Rams. Then we moved to a graphic designer, Massimo Vignelli. Now we're moving to an architect, as in houses and buildings, Mies van der Rohe. So the thing that we keep finding out there is, how right now the conversation about flat design is very hot. Like we all hear about flat design everywhere on Twitter, blogs, like everywhere. It's the hot thing right now to talk about flat design. And the thing, when I hear this word, I usually like totally cringe, and I totally disagree to the fact that we call this flat design, because flat design is just the look and feel aspect of this whole movement. What we're really talking about here is the whole almost philosophical movement that started in the 20th century with a lot of designers from different disciplines that have invested years and decades literally exploring modern design principles. So that's why I don't like calling it flat design, because it kind of reduces this big thing, this big movement with strong and deep roots and philosophical ideas into just something that looks flat. So Mies van der Rohe, an architect, he also did some exploration around design. He had this quote, which was, of course, very popular among many designers in the 60s, less is more. And he did a lot of work in terms of manifesting, not building buildings, not creating or designing buildings in a random way, but really creating, just like we were saying, we were hearing with Massimo and Dieter Rams, based on a grid, based on a structure. There are a couple of other examples of some of his work. This is a very popular house of his called the Farnsworth House. And one of the things that I always find fascinating about this one and beautiful is how clean is the design, how simple how simple is the composition against something that is very natural and organic, which is this background over here. Sean, any anecdotes or stories that you heard about?
Yeah, well, I mean, getting back to the whole, is it flat design or skeuomorphic design, that I mean, kind of the general attitude I like to take is that it's not really about a style, it's about a language, yet again. And that based on kind of a lot, these masters, it was a reductive approach instead of an additive approach to design. So it was about taking things away to find the essence. So in that sense, if you're approaching a design to take away things to find the essence, so generally it's going to be pretty flat, but are shadows illegal and gradients not allowed? That's not the case. It's more about approaching it with that spirit of it being a language. And getting back to Mies van der Rohe, he was just very obsessed with structure and proportions, and obviously as designers, and we need to find that balance of not being dogmatic, but really kind of finding the spirit. Because at the Farnsworth house, which we're looking at right now, apparently there was no actual spot for the garbage can, so the woman that Mies designed it for was kind of upset that she couldn't leave out her trash, and that there was no closets for clothes. So so obviously he was on the extreme end of shunning function, even sometimes for the sake of proportion. But in the meantime, I think there's something to learn there, and caring about proportions and being sensitive to those kind of things.
Yeah, and Sean, that this reminds me a lot of, from the history point of view, that in that 20th century is when we actually started as investigating and researching about language as a logical mathematical system, and it also reflects to the development of technology and computers, but also reflects within art and architecture. And it's very, very interesting how can we approach languages from this logical mathematical point of view, but also seeing languages as visual languages that are designing and creating all these pieces of user experiences.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The design, when we talk about this design language, it really encompasses everything, not only visual design, it's the interaction, it's the whole experience, it's the end-to-end design, just like Massimo says in his latest documentary, right? Design is one, it's not like little pieces. So the other thing we can do here, and I don't want to run out of time, but maybe one of the things we could apply now is a little bit of branding, right? So one of the things I'll do right now is I will apply some some accent color to some of our elements here. So let's start playing with something like this. Maybe we'll apply an orange color for this, because if this is a place for breakfast and I make it blue, I don't know, blue doesn't invite me to like go have breakfast. We're all very familiar with some of the psychology of certain colors and why we're used to them. So orange, yellow, red is something that's definitely more inviting towards having a good meal. So I think I'm going to go for something that looks a little bit more like this. And one of the other typical questions we get in some of the design consultations is whether we should be using the accent color of the user in the user's phone, or we should be using our brand color. And the answer that I will usually give to that is that it all depends on your brand. If your goal is that you want to make your brand, your application strong, you want to create a strong brand that will, hopefully be acquired in the future by a larger company, maybe you want to get investors, etc., then definitely aim for respecting your own brand and have people, users, enjoy the experience of being part of that brand. So in our case, we want to make this orange, so we'll make it orange everywhere. We're not going to necessarily allow the accent color for the user to go through our application, and that's just fine. Just to give you an example, do we think that Facebook would be okay in being green or yellow sometimes? No, like they are blue and they want to be blue, right? So they give a blue experience, and that's perfect. Think about Target, the store, right? Target won't be really yellow or green either. They will be red. They want to be red. So when you go to Target, you feel immersed in that experience. So it's the same thing. So ask yourselves, guys, if you are creating an application where you want your brand to stand out, and then respect and defend your own brand colors. Otherwise, if it's more like something that you guys are looking to contribute to the community, to the ecosystem, or personalization is something very important for you, then by all means do leverage the accent color for the user. So let's make a copy here. Let's make a copy over here, and of this element here. And let's look for something more interesting, because this right now that we have is only typography, and that's fine. There are a lot of little things you could do. For example, if I make this orange and I make the name of my application white, I could also have something probably a little bit stronger on the top.
And one thing to add really quick too is,
Yes.
I mean, when I use color, I always try to think about it as part of that language, you know. So think of color systematically. Obviously, color can have, a branding connotation, but also you can use, color to denote things that are clickable or not clickable as well, or tappable in this instance.
Absolutely, and we should have said that one of the things that Alejandro and I have found in Sean is like he really, one of your particular passions, Sean, is branding, right? And sorry, actually that's not the right word. Identity is the right word. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, branding or identity design is definitely a passion of mine, and I think, when done properly, one of the things that kind of can provide you is the language to articulate, the product or service that you represent, and that's, color is definitely a key part of that, and it's something you need to be sensitive to here, and how do you adapt your identity or your brand to a phone platform is kind of a particular thing too. Of does everything need to be flat if my brand has some textures and shadows to it? And that's kind of something that each platform kind of has its own unique take on. But I know with Windows in particular that kind of the point of this conversation is to branch out from that tile-based approach.
How much time or what type of work do you usually do, Sean, to capture the idea of an identity before even jumping to a user interface? What are the type of questions that you ask to the client, or the exploration that you do? Like sometimes when we do user interfaces, we sketch, we wireframe. How about identity?
Well, with identity design, it's really about what is your organization, or what are the objectives and the things that you believe in. And then I think our challenge as designers is to find a visual representation or articulation of that. And maybe those aren't attributes that are given to the user, but if we look at Braun, obviously they were all about clarity, and that was what they believed in, and that was manifested in the visuals and the industrial design and everything they did. So it's really kind of finding that essence and following that through with anything, any kind of communication or product.
Excellent. So now how about logotypes? Like one of the questions that I've always asked myself, and one of the little like cheap tricks, very cheap trick, especially maybe for a pro like you, Sean, that I'm doing right now is literally just taking a photograph and tracing the silhouette to create something. But how do you approach logo design? Is it very similar to creating icons, or?
It can be. Again, I mean, in the end, anything is always about appropriateness. So, there's some logos that are just simply, if it's Panasonic or Jeep or, countless other logos, that it's really just a name and, a certain typeface. And that's enough. Paul Rand said, the purpose of a logo is to identify and not necessarily to describe. So obviously, you have some logos like Windows, for example, kind of shows that metaphor of Windows, and you've got the Apple logo, which is clearly just an apple, whereas other things are the name itself. So that's kind of one of those sensitive questions you need to ask yourself as a designer of what's the best way to articulate what I'm trying to represent, and sometimes an icon and typography is appropriate. Sometimes it's only an icon. It really varies.
Right. It's a matter of exploration. So we're 5 minutes away from finishing the session. I wonder if we have the ability to maybe open 5 minutes for Q&A. There's so much more. In fact, if you guys don't mind, let me show you the kind of the final result for this whole exercise, which of course takes a little bit longer. But if anyone has any questions or comments via Twitter, feel free to drop me a note, or beyond tiles and nodes. I don't know if that's a smart idea, Tommy, doing it right now.
Yeah, we already have some folks who have submitted questions.
Oh, excellent.
So let me give you the first question, which is about expression design.
Yes.
So the question was why you were using expression design versus something like Photoshop.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So basically, you can totally use Photoshop as well, or Illustrator, or like we've learned from Sean, you can even use it InDesign, of course. Expression design. The only reason we're using it right now is because for a lot of people in the Microsoft ecosystem who don't have Creative Suite, expression design is it's a good alternative, a free alternative that people can use. One potential advantage that you could have in using expression design, if you're a developer, not if you're a designer, but if you're a developer in particular, is that you can copy paste a SAML code between for vector objects from expression design into Blend in Visual Studio, and that can help you in many cases. In other cases, the SAML won't really copy perfectly, like text doesn't copy great in a great way, but things like buttons, icons, graphics, they copy really well. So that would be the answer, I think.
Okay. The next question that came up was around the it was a long question, so I'm trying to shorten it up a bit. And what it was it was basically talking about sort of how the pendulums kind of goes back and forth. So we had things like skeuomorphism, we have modernism, and so their question was, what do we do to make sure that our designs kind of have longevity versus just something that's faddish that, oh, now everybody is doing blurred landscapes in the back of their web pages and things like that. How should they kind of think of things in the long term so that 2 years from now the app that they built doesn't have the, oh yeah, this was the modernism look?
Sean, I have a feeling you want to take on that one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, I mean, in a certain sense, modernism does have a look. It's less and it's very typographic focused. But kind of and obviously things and fads will always come and go. And when the clean and simple approach is no longer fashionable and people are doing something new, like the question is, are you going to follow the style or are you going to stick to your guns and follow a language? So I mean, in that sense, obviously in the web and in the digital space, we see things rapidly changing. Things, shadows are out and suddenly shadows are back in, and blurred landscapes are in, and I think really kind of the main thing is it's more important that we kind of look at that closely and try to articulate what's timeless and what's good and what's going to last. And I know the notion of timelessness sounds almost silly in a sense when we're dealing with these kind of rapidly changing digital spaces, but it's more kind of about the fundamentals and to focus on those fundamentals, and and if you kind of focus on a type based simplified approach, that's the kind of stuff that doesn't look tacky. And I think we're getting to the point finally now where design in itself is enough for a user interface, whereas historically and up until the last few years, a website tried desperately to look like a website, and a user interface tried desperately to look like a user interface. And if you look at any designs, from a web design book from the 90s or previous user interface designs from a decade ago, things were trying to be user interfaces. And now they can just be simple typographic design, and that's really what lasts. Hopefully that helps.
I think it will. So we have 1 minute left here. So what I'd like to do is just to have you both just any last final comments before we wrap things up.
Perfect. Ale, would you like to start?
Yeah. So I think that one of the key takeaways here from a developer point of view is that we can also design and project things. Probably we're not going to be the best designers as developers, but we can also take a look at typography, the grid, to start laying out things, also to sketch all our ideas as developers, because most of the times when we program or we create applications for Windows Phone, we're creating these applications from from our time as a Moonlight project or something like that. And I think we can take advantage of watching and seeing and understanding design as a visual system and as a visual language. So I think that would be my takeaway.
Sean?
I mean, really, I think I've already said it, and Alejandro really hit on the head there, is that it is a system, and to try to restrain yourself to kind of as less but better, strive for a simple system, and that goes an endlessly far way at, clarity in your communications, at, helping your client to understand and, developers to understand that you're working with as a designer, or the other way around. Of things that are extensible and will last and give your clients something that will work for the long run.
Thank you, Sean and Ale. And on my side, well, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. And yeah, I would agree totally with both of my friends here. I think the big takeaway, if you're a developer, you're hearing us and you're a developer, then the big takeaway, hopefully, with this is that it's always good to give ourselves time to sketch ideas out instead of jumping directly into Visual Studio. And if you're a designer, it's the same thing, right? Instead of jumping directly to Photoshop or Illustrator and trying to come up with a user interface, it's always better to sketch ideas and give yourself time for that. So we are going to keep in touch. Hopefully, feel free to hook up with us via Twitter. Let me share with you all of our aliases there in case you guys want to keep in touch. And let us know, what else. This was a very short little exercise, more of a conversation, but we definitely want to spend more time with you. And just for the recording, let me make sure that we missed a bunch of slides there, but I just want to make sure that the video captures these resources online for you that are, I think, fundamental for you guys to have. So this will be in the video. Here are some of our aliases. Toledo Al is Ale, and Rational Design is Sean. And I think there's maybe a closing note here, right, Tommy, around developer movement?
Yeah. So basically what Developer Movement is it is our offering to people who are building apps on Windows 8 and Windows Phone. And what you do is if you build apps, or even if you just sign up, you get points. And you can take those points and actually translate them to actual things, including things like a Surface 2, a nice television, you name it, all kinds of good stuff there. So yeah, and you can go to developermovement.com for that. Just a couple of other things. For those of you who may have joined but didn't sign up for this Hangout, and you want to get that free Windows Phone token, which is a $20 value, feel free to send us an email at developermovement@microsoft.com. But if you did register, then we'll send you an email with a reminder for that as well. Also, after we're done here, I'll be putting in the eval link, so you can tell us if this was helpful to you, as well as give us any type of feedback. And then one more thing, if you want to ask some questions immediately and continue the conversation, just go to Twitter and hashtag it #BeyondTiles. We'll be keeping an eye out for those, and if you have a question, we'll answer it there. So with that, I want to thank everyone who joined us, and also for our presenters today, and hopefully this is a good way to think differently about the way you're designing apps today. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and have a good rest of your morning, day, or evening. Bye-bye.